Hello, one and all, and welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard. And as always, I am joined by the incorrigible Tom Golden and the enigmatic Janice Fiamengo. Uh, very glad to be with you guys again today. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about coronavirus, but from a different angle, from the feminist angle. Um, Tom, you can go ahead and put it up. We're going to refer to an article from The Guardian, and it is an article by Arwa Madawi, which concludes that men, including our president, won't wear masks, generally speaking, during the pandemic because we fear it makes us look weak or that it's not manly or not cool. And she says very directly, I mean, one of the first things, there's so many things wrong with this article that I'm going to start on a little bit and then I'll hand some red meat to Tom and Janice because it's full of glaring holes and misstatements. But one of the things that stood out from the beginning for me was that she says that men, including Trump, find it makes them look weak to wear a mask. And I thought, I've heard Donald Trump say a lot of things, but I never heard him say that one. And I'm pretty much a news buff. So I would have thought that would have been all over, especially the left wing media, if he had said something like that. I had no recollection of it. So she provided a link to an article on The Hill. And I read all the way through that, looking for the president saying that he thought it made him look weak to wear a mask. And lo and behold, it was what Murray Strauss called evidence by citation. She just waved a link and made a statement and lied to us. Bald faced lie. No truth to it whatsoever. Trump never said that, and she writes as though she's inside of his head. Now, I've seen a lot of that from the left-wing media in the past 3 years, them calculating what Trump really thinks, all the way from being an agent of Vladimir Putin to he doesn't want to wear a mask because it makes him look weak. But anyway, this article references a study. There's all kinds of bogus shit in that. And so I'll just throw it out there for us to get started on this and see if we can't give this 30 minutes of fisking that it well deserves.
It sure as heck does. Oh, this woman, I know that we have had cause in the past to talk about Arwa Madawi. And in fact, I think she's been the recipient of one of our esteemed PUTA awards in the days when we used to regularly give those out. And I think she deserves one for this too.
A two-time PUTA.
Yeah, I mean, her entire shtick is anti-male feminist propaganda of the most mean-spirited, fake concern sort. She pretends that this is, something that we should all be worried about because, of course, we know that the male, need, the false need that men have to appear tough is responsible for everything that there is bad in the world of men. And, this is all about how all male ways of being are inferior and damaging to men. And that's why women are so concerned about them. And of course, all female ways of being are superior. And male ways of being lead to male, medical problems because supposedly men don't look after themselves. As we know, they don't express their emotions, and that leads to all sorts of psychological problems. And of course, it's what leads to suicide. And, here again, now it leads to the male inability and failure to look after themselves during the pandemic, meaning that they endanger themselves and they endanger others. It's horrific. I mean, if this were an article about something that women were not doing that they should be doing, supposedly, and there's a big question mark over whether they should be doing this or not. But if this were an article about that, you can bet that there'd be all sorts of sympathetic examination of the reasons for female unwillingness, and there'd be legitimation of those reasons, and so on. But
And
whenever
men would be to blame.
yeah, men would be to blame in some way because of social conditioning that was, very harmful, and women had no choice. And given a range of bad options, they were choosing the one that was least bad or whatever. I mean, there'd be a lot of very generous and empathetic analysis, but that is never the case in this kind of an article. She's just gleefully seizes on yet another study that allows her to intone about so-called toxic masculinity. And sometimes I wonder, with this women like this, I mean, she's part of a whole cadre of feminist journalists whose entire purpose in the world of journalism is to write anti-male articles. She's
Seems
there
like
with Amanda Marcotte and Jessica Valenti and Amanda Hess and so many others. And that's all they do. I mean, this woman writes a weekly column called "The Week in Patriarchy," and the whole point of it is to show that all around the world, all the time, in every place, at every time, women are victims and men make the world a terrible place. Men ruin everything, and that's what she does. And it just never ceases to astound me that people get paid to peddle this kind of purely hateful, mean-spirited propaganda.
Amen. It's crazy. And the thing that gets me, Janice, is this thing is filled with lies. Both the article and I think even the research. And I'm a big proponent of research. I like research to try and hone down and drill down and find out what's really happening. But guess what? That's not what this research was about. Guess what the research questions asked? They asked men and women, would you be more likely to wear a mask after the what do you call this stuff? After the things get relaxed, after
the shelter in place,
the
or the
shelter in place,
lockdown.
after the sheltering in place is relaxed, would you be more likely to wear a mask then? And so, of course, men said, "Well, if it's relaxed, hell with it. I don't want to wear a damn mask." I don't blame them a bit, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But so the media took that. And they went and ran with it and said, "Oh, men don't like masks. Men won't wear masks," which was bullshit. So I wrote to the researcher and I said, "Look, I see all these media articles that are saying that men don't wear masks because they think that's uncool. But your question really wasn't about that. It was about after the sheltering in place is relaxed, what will happen?" And he said, "Yeah," he said, they really did misinterpret things. And I had to ask him, I said, "Well, did you get in touch with anyone?" "No." Too many of them. It went viral. There's too many of them. And I was thinking, okay, but you could have put out a tweet or something just to say this has been misinterpreted.
Yeah, this has been misinterpreted.
They didn't bother to do that.
Yeah, and in quite a profound way, because the point is that men are willing, if it is the legal requirement, to wear the mask. And they're talking about a hypothetical in the future where a lot of men are saying, well, maybe not. I'm less inclined to do so if it's not necessary.
Right.
And I mean, and the thing that, I mean, there's so many things wrong with this study, but I was shocked that it begins from the premise that it is an absolute necessity to wear masks, that masks are an unmitigated good, and that everybody knows that. That struck me as so bizarre. I mean, I thought the point of social science research was to answer a fairly limited kind of question about behavior or, whatever it happens to be, but not to begin from a very particular and dubious political premise, and to also very deliberately link in then with social policy recommendations, like, well, maybe we should just mandate, maybe we're going to have to bring in lots of regulations to force these pesky men to wear masks. I mean, it seems totally outside the legitimate purview of the study to be beginning from that premise and ending with this indication that, let's bring in lots of regulations to force these men to do what so far they're indicating they might not be inclined to do. Really scary stuff.
Nowhere in the body of any of this is it mentioned that there is probably a fairly healthy population of both men and women out there that happen to know that a piece of cloth over your mouth isn't any real protection from anything for anybody either way. And we've gotten so much conflicting information since the beginning of this pandemic. At first it was N95 masks were absolutely, nobody needed them except medical people. And so they lied to us about N95 masks. And I guess I get it. You know, they wanted to reserve them for frontline workers, for medical people, and they were in short supply. But I've even heard recently that they're not at all convinced that an N95 mask even stops the transmission
That's
of
correct.
this disease.
That's
And
right.
so this is sort of like during World War II, they used to have steel drives that were really, gathering steel in the population that were done more for morale of the population than any real need for steel.
Huh.
And this was to keep people occupied with something. So all this practice now with social distancing, that probably has some effect. But you're looking at a factor here that really you can't even say it makes a difference at all. And that's got to skew some of the answers that they were getting from people in there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The more we learn about masks, the more we learn that maybe it's not as helpful as we thought. You know, they did this research in April where they had people who were actually actively had the COVID virus, and they would cough into their N95 mask, right? Then they looked at the masks later, and they found the virus on the inside of the mask and the outside.
On the outside. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just reading that study. Yeah, so even the high-powered mask, let alone these little cloth things that we're supposed to make at home, and that's the thing that I realize here I'm into territory that I don't understand, and maybe some of our viewers are going to say, yeah, but still there's a scientific utility in or there's a medical utility in wearing the mask. That may well be true, but the way the research was set up, the men and women were given such ridiculous options in how they responded to this survey. They were so silly. Like wearing a face covering is cool. How do you answer that?
Well, now that you bring that up, Janice.
I guess if you're robbing a liquor store, it might be pretty cool.
Honestly, like what sort of serious researchers sit down and say, let's force a bunch of adults to respond to that statement? Is it or isn't it cool? What do you think, Paul? What would you say? Is it cool or not? And if you say it's not,
it's lukewarm.
Yeah, it's lukewarm. And honestly, if I were in a bad mood on the day I was doing this survey, and I looked at that, wearing a face covering is not cool. Wearing a face covering is a sign of weakness.
Right.
What does that even mean? Well, actually, when I see people walking down the sidewalk and they're obviously going home from the store and there's nobody around and they're outside and they're carrying bags of shopping and they're still wearing their face mask, I think they look stupid, to tell you the truth, because I don't see why they're wearing that mask. There's nobody around. The wind is blowing. The chances that they're going to get the virus, even from somebody that they pass, are probably infinitesimal. So why are they still wearing the mask? So yeah, I'd say to me, it looks stupid. I admit. When I see somebody driving their car all alone and they're still wearing the mask in the car, maybe they're going somewhere and they don't want to touch their face, but to me, it looks kind of paranoid. Maybe that's just ignorance, but like, these questions are just so ludicrous. I would be tempted to answer them, to answer yes to all of them or no to all of them, just to mess up the researchers. And there's no statement that says I'm reluctant to wear a mask because I have not been given a really convincing reason to do so.
Right.
I've just been told I should.
Right.
And I haven't, and I've been told conflicting information from the beginning of this pandemic. In March, everybody was saying, don't wear masks. Suddenly then in April, it all changed. And we've all seen the studies suggesting that this is based on no real hard data. This is just a guess. And even we've seen studies saying it actually may be bad for you to wear these masks. You may end up, having low oxygen as a result. You may end up having carbon dioxide in your blood, raised levels, because you're constantly breathing in your own exhalations. That may mean that if you have the virus, more of the virus gets sucked back into your lungs or even goes to your brain. I mean, there's all sorts of bad potential consequences of wearing these masks. So there are legitimate reasons why people might decide, I'm just going to do social distancing as to best of my ability, and I'm not going to wear the mask. And that doesn't mean this is a bad person. And it's also not, what's so terrible about a young, healthy guy who doesn't have any elderly parents that he's going to be seeing, isn't going to see anybody who is vulnerable, who's living with a young, healthy woman, and they've both kind of said, if we get the virus, so what? We'll do our best to avoid it, but we're not going to live our lives totally paranoid about it. We're not going to go around wearing masks. That's not the most terrible thing that two young people might decide. And yet, the implication in this study is that this is just, the worst. So if you don't care about your fellow human beings, you want to infect other people and make them die. Just because you don't wear a mask, that doesn't mean you pose a danger to people, which is the implication.
But that is the narrative from the left. This is what they want to tell us all, is that if there's any resistance to the state control around this, it must be because you want people to die.
You want people to die. You don't give a damn. You're a bad person. And it all comes down to this notion that, and the thing that's never talked about now, suddenly to be unquestioning of authority. As soon as authority tells you something, you better damn well do it, or you're not a good person. You're not a good citizen. I thought questioning authority was essential in any, conscious and democratic citizenry. People who question authority are the people who are going to resist tyranny. They're the people who are going to rebel against injustice. And thank God there are men, mostly men, and some women too, who do question authority and aren't willing to jump just because our leaders tell us to do something with a poorly worked out rationale. So the fact that that isn't even, it's not even recognized in discussions like Madawi's and all the others that have picked up on this study and run with it is really scary to me and angering. And I feel like saying to this woman, what is your end game? Do you really think that you're going to it's a good idea to try to turn every man out there into some sort of whimpering, cowed person who just, whatever you say, whatever you say. So yeah, okay, maybe men do, but for biological reasons and other reasons, have less concern about risk. And yeah, that means that when there are forest fires, men are the ones that are running to them and fighting them. It means that when 9/11 happens, mostly men are running into those buildings to save people because their first thought is not for themselves. Their first thought is for others, and they're willing to risk themselves. And that is a tremendously important quality that people in our society have. We should be thankful that there are people. And the few glorious moments in my own life have not been moments where I ever had to risk my own self, but they were moments when I wasn't concerned with whether I was following authority or not. They were moments when I said, fuck that, I'm going to do this because I think it's right. And it's really important that that be validated in people, not constantly beaten down with the message that you're a terrible person if you ever question anything you're told to do. So I just find this whole thing nauseating.
I'm with you on that.
Another part of this that really, really chaps my butt is this drumbeat that we see in the toxic masculinity discussion all the time, that there's a high suicide rate because men don't express their feelings. Yeah. Look, once and for all, when men express their feelings, nobody gives a shit. If you want to know why there's a high suicide rate, there's the reason. It's not because men not expressing their feelings is a rational, thoughtful way to be for a man in this culture. If you express your feelings, if you show weakness, the world is going to crap on you really quick. In particular, women are going to absolutely reject you, look down their nose at you. You are a sexual persona non grata.
Yeah.
Right at that point that you express weakness or express yourself. And we have feminists out here with one big shit test. And I think unconsciously, they're probably trying to get all the alphas to rise to the top by shit testing the entire population of men and being able to reject those men who say, okay, well, I'll express my feelings and talk about my tender side. It's crap. The whole discussion is crap.
So crazy. Yeah.
It starts nowhere and goes nowhere. It's an awful, hateful agenda that they're
keep people in fear. You know, it's kind of the theme that seems to me to be developing. You know, is wear the mask. Those you don't wear a mask. Oh no, everyone should be afraid. You can't do that. La 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 la. By the way, the stats that Janice was talking about with the masks comes from a South Korean research article, right, Janice? And we'll definitely link that so that people can have a look at that themselves because it's fascinating to read about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, the lies of this whole thing just drove me nuts. And one of the lies in the research itself, which drove me nuts, and actually it's the more the media took it to create lies, was the question about whether it's cool or not to wear a mask.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had this 10-point scale where 0 means you thought it was really cool to wear a mask, and 10 meant you thought it was terribly uncool to wear a mask. Let me show you something here. Let's see if I can find this. Well, he can't find it. At any rate, I've got to find that thing. What is going on? Oh, there it is. Silly me.
Oh, good.
It was hidden.
Oh, good.
Anyway, here's the chart. And you see this question, men answered 5.03 out of 10, right? Women answered 4.67 out of 10. But look at that.
5.03 meant it was just slightly more uncool.
But here's the most important piece, Janice. 5.03, 5 means neither agree or disagree.
Right.
It doesn't mean we think this is uncool. It
Okay,
means neither. But what they could say is more men, as in, you know, just a tiny percentage more men thought it was uncool. And so you see headlines all over the place like this one, you know, where it comes up and the Hill says men less likely to wear a face mask because they're not cool and a sign of weakness. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's just like they
pure lie. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
It's just absolutely
when men said they didn't care one way or another about the factor.
I neither agree nor disagree. It's just, it is what it is. The other thing they didn't talk about was that the research said very clearly that when masks are mandatory, men and women choose to wear them at the same rate.
Yeah.
The same rate.
So
whether it's cool or not.
Yeah.
So they've twisted this, you know, to make it just what they want to push their narrative. Yeah. And the research, frankly, was really able to be twisted easily. You know, they created a study that I think was easy to.
They didn't even really twist the research. They just lied about it.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah. They just, I mean, really,
but it's true. I mean, men thought it was less cool than women thought, but it was
but
that
by
much.
a tiny,
only that much.
Yeah.
Well, so as you said, it wasn't even really an indication of them thinking it was either cool or uncool to do it. Them being right in the middle of the questioning is really saying they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
One way or the other. That it's like, I neither agree nor disagree is like saying, I don't think coolness or uncoolness has anything to do with a mask.
Right. Right.
That's what I get from that.
I mean, it's extraordinary. That's what I get too. And that would be my response. I don't give a damn. Cool is not an issue.
Right.
When it comes to the mask.
But that's what you ask when you want to be able to come to and that's why the research itself is it's structured.
Yes.
The methodology just sucks.
And what the research does not understand is the whole idea of precarious manhood. because men have to consider how something is going to make them look, because if they don't, they're going to drop like a rock in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And precarious manhood says, if you don't look cool, if you look less cool, man, women are not going to care about you, you know? So I would guess that men would be more concerned about looking cool, and for good reason, you know, because that's what drives their whole being is being able to raise up in the hierarchy as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And you know, what was the researcher? I mean, well, I know there were two, like, why would they even choose such terms? You know, they must have, I mean, maybe I'm being extremely ungenerous in trying to imagine what they were thinking, just like Arwa Madawi does with Trump, you know, great mind reader that she is. But, you know, I have to wonder, were they thinking about the headlines? And were they thinking about this kind of very, you know, feminist compliant kind of findings? Because I bet they thought that more men would find it uncool to wear a mask, and more men would say, yeah, it kind of makes you look weak if you've got a mask on, even if it's just that little bit. Because of course, why would women even care about such a thing? Because we know women tend to be more, you know, authority compliant, and, you know, more timid and more willing to follow orders if they're told it's going to make them safe and all that. So it's as if they set up a study with the ends already clearly in mind, pretty certain that they were going to find a specific thing about gender that they were looking for, and that this would be a very popular study, just exactly in the way it turned out to be, even though actually the men didn't respond in the way they were expecting, or at least certainly not to the degree that they were expecting. So, I mean, the whole thing kind of stinks from beginning to end.
And I have a feeling, Janice, that the researchers knew that if the research was slightly anti-male, it had a better chance to go viral. If it turned out neutral or anti-female, boom, gone. You know, but
this sounds to me like a survey.
What's that, Paul?
I said, it sounds to me like a survey that the questions were designed with the conclusion in mind.
Yeah,
it seems like that in some ways, doesn't
it?
I
think so. I really do. And, you know, like, why not? I don't know. There's all sorts of other variables. If you want to look at socioeconomic class and how that impacts on one's willingness to wear a mask, if you want to look at age, if you want to look at education level, I mean, there's all sorts of things you could parse out, but it wouldn't be as sensational or interesting. And in fact, they might find things that aren't really politically correct about, you know, other variables that impact on, you know, who will or won't wear a mask.
That's
and
why
that's
I wanted
not
to
as
see their
sexy.
data. In fact, I asked the researcher if he would send me his raw data or send me a link where I could see it. He won't do it. I don't know if I told you guys that, but he said, no, actually, we're, you know, wait a couple of weeks and maybe then. And because I had some ideas about that, and I will check it out as time goes on. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
And it's the same reason that I'm sure, and I don't want to, wait a minute, I don't want to make the same mistake that our winner of 2 Puta Awards has done and play like I'm mind reading. But, you know, I wonder if there's a connection between not letting you see the results and the fact that he didn't do a single thing to correct the misuse and the bad conclusions about the research that got spread all over the media. Because this is, after all, it's putting his name out there.
Exactly. And that means more money for him, more research funding. You know, if his name gets out there, then he's going to be known. And so, yeah, there is a vested interest in his part to make this thing go viral.
For sure. Yeah.
Oh, well.
I don't know.
Crazy.
I mean, it's discouraging, you know, when you see the willingness to jump all over this kind of thing, of these malicious anti-male writers, it's really makes me sick, you know. And to have this woman, especially pretending, oh yeah, she feels so much concern for these guys.
Yeah.
And, you know, toxic masculinity is why they commit suicide. You know, and then at the same time, in the very same week when she's doing her This Week in Patriarchy, telling us all the ways that men ruin the world. One of the things that she mentioned is a study that's been done of what they call benevolent sexism. I know that you guys know all about that too. Can you imagine that there's a survey being done about attitudes in relation to benevolent sexism of young kids ages 5 to 11? And guess what it found? That many boys exhibit benevolent sexism, and they tend not to grow out of it. And what those boys don't realize is that their love for women, their kindly feelings, their desire to be protectors of both little girls and women in general, those are all really terrible things. Those indicate sexism, condescension. They don't realize how patronizing they're being when they imagine rescuing a pretty girl, you know, from some danger, when they fantasize about that in their play or in their minds. And she wonders why young men feel suicidal and feel estranged from their society when from the time they're 5, they're being subject to this kind of hectoring, you know, condemnation for their sweetest and most noble impulses. I mean, it's really
this
sick.
Particular ploy with this stuff, Janice, is, I find particularly disgusting. Feminists now frame women's preferential treatment, women's privilege, as sexism against them. When women are treated with favoritism in family courts for custody, it's because we assume women are better child caretakers. So it's really misogyny. When women are kept off of the battlefield and the meat grinder of combat zones, well, it's because we're discriminating against them. Women are just chomping at the bit to get on the battlefield. They're lined up saying, "Let me at it," and we won't
let me die.
So it's the ultimate stacked deck against men. So where women do face discrimination, it's misogyny. Where they experience privilege and preference, it's misogyny.
Gynocentrism.
Heads you win, tails I lose.
I put up a message from Dean Hedges, which says self-reporting surveys have naturally occurring gynocentric biases. And I think that sums up things pretty well.
Sure it does.
Yeah.
Sure does.
Hey, Dean, how you doing, bud?
Hi, Dean. Good to hear from you.
Indeed. And if anybody has any questions, we could pull those up now.
Our comments.
Yeah, comments, questions, whatever's. So we kind of get carried away talking, and I don't look at the daggone comments, but what can you say? So if there's any comments or questions, bring them up. Otherwise,
fire them at us. Yeah, I think we pretty well did that one to death.
Yeah, I think we did. They did it to death, and then we just finished it off. But it was a turd from the beginning.
You're welcome, Dean. Thank you. Yeah, man.
But we do know one thing for sure.
What do we know, Paul?
Men
are
good.
Janice, she did it.
She did it right on time. Didn't even miss a beat, man.
No problem.
Getting good after a year. I finally figured it out.
Oh, God.
Hey, let me give a shout out to you guys watching this. And as you see this ahead, come on over to the Facebook page and follow Regarding Men on Facebook. There'll be a link below. We'll get it out to you.
Indeed. So we finished?
I think we are.
I think we are. Have a great week, guys.
See if I can figure out how to turn it off. Oh, well. Y'all take care. We'll see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.